Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's that time of the year. It's my first mock draft of the season. We'll go over my top picks and why defensive tackle could be a can't-miss opportunity for the Steelers in the first round. The Steelers making their first roster cut and final grades in the Steelers safeties, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listener today because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 back in bonus bets with your first bet of $5 or more winning. Go to FanDuel.com for more details today. All right, Steelers fans, we hope you had a great weekend. That was now the first weekend without football in so long, and it's the start of a long series of those weekends until we get back to September. But point being, we have a lot to go over. We'll go over the Steelers roster move over the weekend in a bit, but it's that time of the year where we start looking at mock drafts. And while this will not be the first official mock draft Monday where we get all of your submissions, we will start that next week. So if you're one of those people that look forward to sending in all your mock drafts every single weekend to get your chance to get your picks on the show, don't worry, that'll be back. But we're doing that next week. I always push that off because it does get old after about the 12th week in a row. But we're going to go over my first mock draft. And I wanted to do this mock draft this week as my pre-combine mock draft because the combine is next week, and that'll be when things get started there. But I wanted to give you guys a sense of just my early research, where I have things going, just certain players that I've been keeping my eyes on, and what I've been looking at when I use different simulators and how the Steelers have kind of had their situation set up for them. Now, there's several different ways the Steelers could go in the early rounds. We've talked about DT. We've talked about wide receiver. We talked about corner, and there's options for all of them in the early rounds. Benjamin Morrison is a corner. I don't know him. I really like the idea of bringing him in. If you could get a guy like that, if he can recover from his injury from last year at a good clip. There's wide receivers that you could get. We've talked about that with Alan Saunders a bit. Guys like Matthew Golden, guys like Emeka Egbuka, they'd fit really well. Luther Bird maybe a little bit less because he's more that slot guy, but there's plenty of guys that can fit there. But the one position that I think makes a lot of sense and could be a can't-miss opportunity for the Steelers in the first round is defensive tackle, and especially because of the talent that'll be available in the first round. Now, there's other guys in the later rounds who I think could certainly work, and we'll talk about those guys throughout the years we keep analyzing the NFL draft. But there are legitimately, I think, 4 guys that I think qualify as first-round graded defensive tackles. Mason Graham out of Michigan is the top one. A lot of people think he's going to go top 10, maybe even top 5. Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, also out of Michigan, another one. I think he's a top talent. I think that he might be getting some. I think his shine might be less bright to some people because he played next to Mason Graham, and people think that he's not as good. And I don't think he is as good, but I do think that he can be pretty. I do think he could be a big difference maker in the NFL. Walter Nolen out of Ole Miss, who was seen briefly at the Senior Bowl, and then of course Tyleik Williams at Ohio State. Those are your 4 right there. And the thing is that I think that if the Steelers really need a defensive tackle and they want to get one of those game changer type of guys, all 4 of these guys would have shots to become that in the NFL, especially those first 3, Grant, Graham, and Nolen. I think all 3 of those guys, they are guys that could develop into that could be space eaters, as well as guys that can change the line of scrimmage, and that's what the Steelers really need. So in my first mock draft, and honestly, I always play around with mock drafts. I just kind of look to see where things are and just keep an eye on things as far as how certain simulators are running them. My first one did prioritize that, and so here's my picks here on the show. I started off with Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan in the first round. Went with Jay Higgins, receiver out of Iowa State in the second round. In the third round, I feel like this is still a cheat because I don't think he's going to be there in the third round, but Azariah Thomas the cornerback out of Florida State. We've talked about him. He had a great Senior Bowl week. His measurables should be awesome at the combine. I think he's going to wow some people. I think he's going to go from a guy who seems to be projected in the late third in the simulators into maybe like the second. Some people even say the first round. So right there, that's all three needs: D tackle, wide receiver, corner right away. I get Preston Smith out of SMU as a running back in the fourth round. Fifth round went with another corner, Denzel Burko out Ohio State. Tyler Shuck, the quarterback out of Louisville, in the seventh, and then safety Jordan Hancock, also out of Ohio State, also in the seventh, and then the final seventh round pick, Kanate Mumfield, receiver out of Pitt. So doubling up at corner and wide receiver there. Corner and wide receiver there for the Steelers, as they weren't they weren't the top position pick there. But I think the whole point of this is that when you're looking at what the Steelers need, they can get these other positions here. But again, if the emphasis is for your team to dominate the line of scrimmage, if your emphasis is to get after the quarterback, but also being able to stuff the run, they need another killer next to Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton. Again, Keanu Benton was asked to be the nose. It was an interesting experiment, but ultimately he wasn't destroying the double teams. He was getting blown back into the linebackers. He wasn't holding that down when he was playing more three technique, when you line up more over the guard or the tackle. That's where he was finding his home a little bit more. He looked a lot more comfortable there. It's clear that Keanu Benton is a guy who can be a difference maker. He's a guy that can beat up on O linemen. He's a guy that can run well in space. He's a guy that can understand his place in a play and think on his feet and make adjustments and do those things. But I don't think he is a mauler in the sense that the way the Steelers need to change the line of scrimmage in the middle of it, the way that, Jalen Carter is just an unstoppable force for the Eagles. And I'm not saying that that guy is in this draft class. Who knows? Maybe he is. But I think the Steelers need someone who can bring it in the middle of their defense the way that Cam Hayward brings it and brought it in his prime. And I said this during the season. If you were listening to this show during the season, and when, even when they were looking good, I was like, man, it really feels like D tackle and corner are going to be some major priorities in this offseason. And I really think D tackle is one of those positions that you don't want to even sign an older player, because you've already tried that with Larry Ogunjobi. You want to go get a young guy who can be a contributor early, get out in the field early, but then also develop into one of those long-standing defensive tackles, so that you can have those guys. You can have him and Benton as a 1-2 punch moving forward for the next several years on your team. Guys that you develop, make it to the core of the defense, and someone that can take on the mantle of Cam Hayward when he eventually does decide to hang it up and retire. But again, you get another presence up front that can, one, do better against double teams, but attract that kind of attention. You're going to cause more communication issues. That's the thing that can make it tougher on offensive linemen who want to key in on TJ Watt. But if they have to worry about about Hayward, another tough defensive tackle, as well as Watt and Highsmith, that can be a real big game changer there. And then again, if you throw Keanu Benton in the mix, those are the things that when you force offensive lines to have to think, to talk more, those are when communication breakdowns happen. Those when more mistakes happen, and that's when you start to get more loose with what you're able to do as a defense, with how you can be an aggressive to force offenses into more mistakes. That's why I think D tackle is such a priority in this draft class. You need to get a guy to line up there. And again, you look at the other talent that I was able to use and find in this mock draft. Wide receiver, I like Jaden Higgins a lot. I think he can be an outside wide receiver day one. I think he can be a guy with George Pickens who becomes a major threat to catch the ball. He can go up and get it. He looks real sharp. I liked his Senior Bowl tape. I need to do more studying of him in his whole collegiate career, but I like the way he works there. Azariah Thomas, Denzel Burke, both those guys at corner. I just think those could be nice young reinforcements to a cornerback room that's going to need talent in the coming years. Preston Smith, because at this state they do need a running back. Though Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette did say that the Steelers, might bring back Najee Harris. That would be very interesting and go against everything that what I've been hearing as far as how the Steelers were handling things. But still getting one of those running backs in the middle rounds, and again, not spending on running back early in this draft class, because you want to spend that on these other positions here. That's where you could go get a guy like Brashard Smith, Damian Martinez out of Miami. those type of guys who you didn't have to spend really, a day one, or day two pick on in your mock, because you wanted to, if you're the Steelers, you want to be spending those picks on those other pillar positions that you're still trying to build up. So those are your options right there. And again, then when we get to the later rounds, just trying to fill other needs, adding a young quarterback to the mix, Jordan Hancock, because you could use a young safety in the mix. Maybe you can move him to slot somehow. And then Konate Mumfield, just a really shifty wide receiver who I've covered at Pitt. I think he's a tough dude, and I've written about him for the Post-Gazette. And if he tests well at the combine, I think he will jump up in his stock in in a lot of the big boards out there, because I do think he can be a difference maker with his ability to separate from defenders with his hands, and he's a pretty consistent guy. So that's why I picked him there for now. But there you have it, the first mock draft of the Locked On Steelers podcast for the offseason. Again, defensive tackle is a priority, but there was another defensive player who was let go this past weekend. We'll talk about who it was, the impact of it, and what it might say about the next move the Steelers have when it comes to their salary cap, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you, this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just beginning on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because FanDuel is your home for NBA live betting. So even if you missed the first few minutes of the game, or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can make your picks from the first whistle until the final buzzer. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to play, now is the perfect time to join. New FanDuel customers can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you hit your first bet of $5 or more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here today after going over my mock draft and just, again, the emphasis on defense there. One thing the Steelers did on defense was they made a move I said that was always coming and was definitely going to have to happen this year. They cut Preston Smith this past Friday, and that allowed for the opening up of about $13 million in cap space. Again, when they traded for Preston Smith, he was on a big money contract. The Steelers weren't beholden to have to hold that, this season. And so that's what they did. They cut that contract down. And now the Steelers go from having about $40 million in cap space to about $53 million in cap space. And that's a good place to be. But again, I think the Steelers still have a lot more ammunition when it comes to freeing up cap space if they really wanted to. Now, some of those players I think that could be on the chopping block are older players who either haven't been playing or haven't been, as big of contributors as you like. Top one for me right now off the bat though is Larry Ogunjobi. Ogunjobi, I think, brought some good times for the Steelers, and I think that he's not a bad player. In fact, under defensive line grades, I think I gave him a C+ on the season. He wasn't a detriment to the Steelers, but he also wasn't a difference maker. And this upcoming year, he's going to be he would be a $10.5 million cap hit if the Steelers kept him around. He didn't produce like that for the Steelers. And I think that's the issue that he runs into there. It's not like a harsh thing about it. It's just a reality. They need to find people who can be difference makers, whether it's on offense or defense or both. And if they let go of Larry Ogunjobi, that frees up about $7 million in cap space. That would get them to about $60 million in cap space total there. But there's other moves that can be made as well. And this is where I think that there's going to be some interesting questions about how they want to handle things. There's other veterans that could get you a nice little chunk of cash back in your salary cap this year as well. For example, Isaac Seumalo, he's a $10.1 million cap hit. As we kind of talked about during the season, didn't really get it. He wasn't really that consistent. And that's where you hope that, maybe it was just the injury, but the Steelers need to consider this. Now, I think that Isaac Seumalo should feel real safe. I don't think Larry Ogunjobi should, but Seumalo still represents the veteran presence of the offensive line. He did suffer an injury early in the year, and maybe the Steelers look at that and they say, hey, you can work with him. You can find a way to make him part of the, be the old head of the young buck offensive line that the Steelers are deploying there. But again, you have Isaac Seumalo. You get $7.8 million for letting him work back into your salary cap space. And another guy who makes decent money for the Steelers, or was scheduled to make decent money from the Steelers, is Cole Holcomb, who we know didn't play all this last season and got hurt in the middle of the 2023 season, which led to him not being able to play for a year and a half. And now he is a $7.6 million cap hit on the Steelers. And if they were to let him go, he would save them about $6 million of those dollars in their salary cap space. And so you have three more moves right there, where if they did those three moves, Larry Ogunjobi, Isaac Seumalo, and Cole Holcomb, that would get you about 20 plus more, almost 21 million more dollars in cap space. That would then put you, I believe, it's $73 million in cap space total. That'd be a lot of money for the Steelers to spend. It would make it so that if T. Higgins, for whatever reason, wasn't franchise tag, you could go after a guy like that with that kind of money. You can go after other guys. You can sign Byron Murphy. You can look at other guys for your offensive line. There's so many opportunities there for the Steelers there this offseason to make that money. And I think that there's other little places you can cut to, like Cordero Patterson is you can save $2.8 million on his money. I think that Cordero Patterson was fine for this year. I think I gave him a C on his final grade for the season. But Cordero Patterson, a guy that I think was brought in to help you do some certain trends there and help here and there and be that third option. I think you can find that third option in the draft, or if you feel like bringing him back, that's another thing. But I don't think but either way, he's not that expensive. You'd only save about $2.8 million in the salary cap space by letting him go. But yeah, point B is, though, the Steelers can make moves, and I think the Steelers have those, and they'll be coming out soon to see, okay, which players can you afford to let go of, which ones can't, and how do you set yourself up to be ready to go in and be able to sign people in free agency that are going to fill big holes. Because again, remember, it's not just random free agents. It's also still the quarterback position that the Steelers have to figure out when it comes to who's going to play quarterback, because Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, neither of them are on the roster still at this point. And that's where I think the Steelers are going to have some really big challenges as far as this offseason and the pressure that they face there, because whoever they sign at quarterback knows that they don't have the answer right in front of them. So they're going to be able to sort of play games with the Steelers a little bit and kind of say, like, okay, I want more money. I want this. I want that. And that's where it's going to be up to the Steelers and Omar Khan to find a way to negotiate, get people to the same table and be able to make that work while not bankrupting the team because you went and overpaid for a quarterback and a quarterback that's not on the superstar levels just yet. I think that, again, if we're talking Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, what you're doing there, whatever your opinion is, that's fine. But the Steelers, I think it would behoove them to sign one of those guys that know their system and that's shown success. Both of them showed success at different parts of the year. And I think that if you're not overpaying to get one of those guys, you're winning right there already, because there's so many other things the Steelers have to do with this draft class and have to do with free agency. And the more freedom you get there, I think that would be the better. I still think that there's a lot of I still think there's a lot to be done with this roster. I still think that you can add at corner, and who knows, maybe they add a DT at in this free agency period. But I think that there's space for the Steelers to make the move that they need to make. This is not like in the past years where they've had like $15 million in cap space, and that felt like a lot because the Steelers were just signing everybody. The Steelers, they're going to be able to make some moves. And so it's going to be up to Omar Khan. How aggressive does he want to be? How, what positions does he go after? What trades do the Steelers entertain? There's a lot of possibilities there, but that's why, again, I think the Steelers are in a good place. The cutting of Preston Smith opened up to the team to $53 million plus. And I think that there will be more opportunities coming forward where the Steelers create more cap space very, very soon. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, It's time to get you our final grades on the safety position for the Steelers, something that we've been tallying here. Almost done. It's safeties and then specialists we'll do hopefully tomorrow on the show. Lots to still break down. Stick with us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here. We go to our final grade segment. As always, we've been grading players every single game. They get a grade, whether it's a neutral grade that doesn't receive stars or skulls, or they receive 1 to 3 stars, meaning good to elite play, or 1 to 3 skulls, meaning bad to all-time terrible play. And after each game, we give them grades, and we try to look things up and pan things out. And that's where that's where we tally all these things up, and then we kind of create our grading system where certain guys get certain things. But let's start this off with an easy one. I typically don't do guys that don't see the field that much, and that's Miles Killebrew. He didn't have one of those big blocks this year. I don't think so. He didn't really get a star or a skull, so that's fine for a C. But that's Miles Killebrew. He does the special teams right, and that's important. I want to point this out that I think the biggest thing for the safety unit was that none of these guys were in the negative on the season, but they also weren't big difference makers. Case in point, well, at least in playmaking, different makers. Case in point, DeMonte Casey did have an interception on the year, but 4 stars, 3 skulls. That's good enough for a C. That's not, that's pretty average as far as the from what I think he even tell you that. But part of what the Steelers are going through right now is they're trying to find their core playmakers on both sides of the ball, and they need safeties who are going to be more contributory to being those big playmakers moving forward. And one of them is going to be the next guy up on the click that comes up here as far as his grade, and that's Minkah Fitzpatrick. Minkah Fitzpatrick on the year, I only gave him 10 stars on the season. He did have 7 skulls on the year, no bus tickets, but he did get that gets you a C+ grade with 3 more stars than skulls on the year. And again, I want to emphasize, I don't think Minkah Fitzpatrick was bad. I think the problem was Minkah Fitzpatrick just wasn't the game changer that he has been when he's been a multi-time first team all-pro safety. And so I think that's where Minkah Fitzpatrick needs to get back to being like that. And we've talked about on this show ways that might happen. It's why I think it would be imperative for the Steelers to go get corners who can line up, run, play bump and run, be physical, be aggressive, but not be giving up entire sidelines or deep balls all the time, because then Minkah Fitzpatrick can go from just being the deep guy that protects everyone to being the guy that can move around as much as he wants and do what he needs to do to set up the turnovers and those opportunities. I think that's something that the Steelers really need Minkah Fitzpatrick to get back to doing. And again, only 1 interception in the year. And it's funny if when he picked off Lamar Jackson in the second Ravens game and set the Steelers up, I thought that was a chance for the Steelers to try to turn things around. It, of course, didn't work out that way. But I do think a big part of it it's not about his lack of focus or anything like that. I still think he's a heck of an athlete, and he's got his head turned on straight. But I think Minkah Fitzpatrick does need to. I do think they need to see him be that playmaker again in the coming years, because that's going to be a very important thing. If they're able to stop the run, if they're able to get after the quarterback, they're going to have those errant throws that they force from quarterbacks. And Minkah Fitzpatrick, in the early part of his career, was all over those a lot. Now we got to see how he plays when he gets more of those opportunities. So that's Minkah Fitzpatrick with his final grade on the season. But as I say, we go from, whenever we do grades, we go from the worst to the best. And this one, if Minkah Fitzpatrick's not your best, you can probably guess who is. It's DeShon Elliott. On the season, I gave him 13 stars, 2 skulls. That's good enough for a B grade on our scale here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But I look at what DeShon Elliott was able to do, and he was a difference maker. He was moving things around. He was kind of getting things going. For the Steelers, he could hit people in the hole. He could blitz. He could, cover tight ends, cover running backs, cover wide receivers in the slot. He does a lot of things really well. And I think that's where DeShon Elliott definitely impressed and showed the ability to be that guy who can line up next to Minkah Fitzpatrick, not be, pushed into a shadow because of what be a playmaker himself. I mean, he made himself felt that way a lot, and he sounded like a guy who was holding people accountable at the end of the year. We played the video clip of him in this on this very podcast when I asked him, what needs to happen. He talked about guys need to stop leaving guys wide open. And he was one to call out the Steelers defense for those issues. And so I think that if you have a guy who's a leader, who's a hard hitter, who's a playmaker, all packaged into one, that's a good opportunity for the Steelers to just keep their guy, make it a real simple thing there, and run it back with the safety group next year. But again, maybe there's some other additions you want to make. Maybe you want to look at what you're doing there. But I think that the Steelers safety situation right now, they could probably use some youth to the position. That's why I drafted Jordan Hancock in the late rounds. But just looking at how the Steelers have kind of set themselves up right now, I think they're trying to not have to invest back into the safety position too heavily, and that's going to depend upon DeShon, Elliott, and Minkah Fitzpatrick being that dynamic duo in the backfield and making enough plays to get those kind of considerations. But those were our safety grades here. Let us know what you think. I know there's a lot of people that wanted some more negative grades for Minkah Fitzpatrick. It's a lot more complicated than that, but I do think that there's room to improve for this safety room, and I think you're going to see them try to find other ways to free up Minkah Fitzpatrick and make him a roamer and let him be the guy that can be the turnover creator for the Steelers defense that has caused havoc more than a couple times for opposing offenses. So that being said, thank you for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let me know what you think of our first mock draft, the 1.0 version pre-combine. We're going to have one post-combine, but don't forget next Monday is mock draft Monday, is the first mock draft Monday of the season, where you, the viewers and listeners, can submit your picks in the mock draft simulator. And then post them on my Twitter or on the Locked On Steelers Facebook group. You do that there under the post that I point out there heading into the weekend. You'll have your chance to get on the show. And again, thanks for everyone for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all of the social media, same handle everywhere at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Back here tomorrow with more on your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.